control room.
Okay.
So you and I are both on the Zoom call. There we go.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our April school board meeting. We'd like to begin with a pledge and then a invocation. Pledge by Kelly and invocation by Paul.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our Father in heaven, as we humbly bow our heads this night, we give thee thanks for the opportunity we have of being at this meeting to talk about and to help better the children of our district. We are so thankful for the staff and all that serve so diligently and work hard to make a difference in these young people's lives. We're thankful for this area in which we live and for the good people that surround us. And at this time ask that thou would bless our leaders, that they may make correct decisions in our behalf, that we may know of the things that are good and be able to rejoice and to love to have those with us. We again are thankful for the many blessings that thou givest to us and for this day. And this we thank thee in our Savior's name, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you both. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll move to approve as presented.
A second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes. 3.1, approval of meeting minutes from March.
I move to approve the meeting minutes for March.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. 4.1, ratification of expenses and payroll vouchers, tax credits, and activity accounts.
I'll move to approve as presented.
A second.
Motion and a second. Anybody have any discussion on these items? All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes. Five point one, call to the public. We have one person. Janelle Sterner.
Good evening, board members. Thank you so much for this time. I would like to thank you guys for the presentation that I watched last week at the meeting for your teacher shortage and the things and that's going on. But the other part I would also like to know is from that March 21st meeting, watching it, why there was no information on the website to the parents and community members regarding the internet and sexting issue that was presented last time. As a community member, parents, teachers, grandparents, we have the right to just know how the school board is going to handle. Technically, this is a horrible situation that's happening here. So, I mean, technically it's an atrocity that, again, because there could be more students that have had experience with what was going on with the grooming or being able to just dive in and but be afraid to tell what was going on. So I'm just asking that the school board put on the next agenda on May, because this could be an issue that is where people can go to jail because this is very serious. These are children and they deserve, and parents, what's going on regarding how you guys as a school board are going to be able to handle this. So I'm asking again that you guys please put it on the next meeting of how the school board is going to handle it. And just again, elections are coming up, so I just want to remind, because again, we want to make sure we take our voice and vote for the right people. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to remind everybody that when we have call to the public, we cannot directly address what we're asked about. We also would like to encourage you to go to the specific site, principal, and visit with them, because there are some obviously privacy issues and then some other issues that if those certain things come before us, then, there are certain protocols that we have to follow and stuff. So we'd like you to remember that, please. All right. 6.1, Phantom of the Opera. Come on down. We're so glad you're here. You guys always do such a great job. Can't wait for this.
Thank you so much.
My wife won't take me to New York, so...
Well, it's not there anymore, unfortunately.
Well, that's why she won't take me to New York. She won't even take me to L.A.
My name is Julie Turvey. I'm here on behalf of Cynthia Whipple, who's the director and choir teacher for these wonderful kids. In my 10 years as a music educator in the state of Arizona, not just in this community, but in others as well throughout the state, I have never come across a group of kids this professional, this wonderful. This is a very special group of kids who have dedicated hours, weeks of their time, months of their time to make sure that this is the absolute best production. And each and every one of you, please come multiple times. And just information on that, you can purchase tickets at the door or on the website gofan.co.com/Show Low High School, GOFAN.co/Show Low High School. Tickets are $10 for adults, $9 for seniors, and $7 for kids. We are doing performances mostly 7 p.m. the 26th and 27th of April, and then the 1st through the 4th, as well as a 2 p.m. matinee on the 4th. So please come, spread the word. Again, these kids have done an amazing job. So what they're going to sing for you today is kind of a show within a show. This is an opera production that they are putting on within the Phantom of the Opera, and it's it hails in the style of Mozart. It's very fun, very playful. A wife to a very famous duke, wealthy duke, is having an affair with her mute servant who is playing as a female. So in lots of operas, what you'll have are called trouser roles, where women will represent men, and that is the case in this. So it's not strange, I promise. It's not anything weird. We'll go ahead and do that for you. Turn this on.
Shame, shame, shame. This is the lady's not for ladies. Shame. England on affairs of state, I must leave you.
What fool is leaving?
I suspect. Addio.
so much.
All right.
So good, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck. Break a leg. Not really, but in the entertainment meaning. Okay, 6.2, Business Office Finance Update. Karen Smith here virtually with us.
Yes. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, hang on. Coming on through
There you
video and
are.
how to, good evening. How are you all?
Good. How are you, Karen?
I'm doing good. Thank you for letting me join you virtually this evening. So I am just bringing up the first PowerPoint that I have to share with you because I've got a couple of items that I'm going to be going over with you tonight. This first item being on this agenda item for the business office update, and then we have a couple other agenda items, so I'll keep some of my updates for those items more specifically for the audit and the budget projections to those later agenda items. But this evening, I do have a couple of updates just to share with you as we continue to progress and really move forward all of our operating procedures within the business office. I'm excited to share with you some of the audit results here in a few minutes, but first I'm going to share my screen so I can share with you a little bit of an overview of a report that was recently issued from the Auditor General's office. So you should be seeing my screen now, and I can see that. So if you have any issues seeing it or have any questions for me, please don't hesitate to stop me. Unfortunately, once I share my screen, I can't see all of you. So since I can't see if you're like trying to get my attention, just interrupt me if I'm talking. So what I have to share with you tonight is a report that is issued annually from the Auditor General's office. So the Arizona Auditor General's office for about the past 20 plus years, 22 years now, has been issuing what's called the Arizona School District Spending Report. And what this report does is it takes all of our Arizona public school districts and it takes our financial information from the prior fiscal year. So this would be for last school year, so FY23. And it identifies various different metrics that the district can use for future decision making and just additional information to our public. This information is available out on the Auditor General's website, and I will also point out that we have cross-referenced and posted this to our district website as well. So what I wanted to do is just provide you a little bit of overview about this report. It was issued right at the beginning of March, and unfortunately I wasn't able to be with you at the March board meeting, so I wasn't able to present it at that time. So I wanted to share this information with you now. So what I've done in this presentation is just provided a couple of snips from the report, some screenshots from the report to show you some of the different components that are included. It is a very lengthy report in that the Auditor General's office provides all of the metrics and all of the data that they use for these different sections of the report, which include the total district spending, the instructional spending, the spending per student, the average teacher pay, school district efficiencies, as well as some of the COVID-19 impact. And where that COVID-19 impact comes from, obviously that's a newer component of the report in the last couple of years, but really more so how COVID-19 funding has impacted the school district budgets and more so the cash balances that districts across the state have carried over as a result of some of the additional funding that was provided. So some of the key areas that we like to look at in this report is how the school district is spending its dollars in comparison to what the statewide averages look like. And I'm going to bring that information up next. So this is a screenshot of the state's calculations when they look at all of our district spending. So this isn't just the maintenance and operation fund. This is all of the district funding sources across the board. This is our grant funding. This is our capital funding, various different funding sources that we have. And you can see the chart under the district calculations label. That is just a pie chart with some of the percentages of how the district spends its dollars. And this has been kind of the key component that has been in the report every year for all of these years, where the state looks at how we classify our expenditures. And we are required to follow the chart of accounts that's established by the Arizona Auditor General's office. And within that chart of accounts, we have an element within our account code that's identified by the function code. And that function then determines whether or not the function of that expense is for the instructional spending, if it's for administration, if it's for plant operations, such as our maintenance or transportation, etc., all of those different areas. And what's grouped under that classroom spending would include our direct teachers, our paraprofessionals, all of the supplies and materials that are used directly in our classroom, as well as the staff and expenses that we have that are associated with our student support, which includes many of our counseling services, our health services, our social work or attendance type services, as well as all of our related service providers, such as occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech language pathology, psychology services, etc. That's what student support is considered. And then the other category that's included in our classroom spending is instructional support. And instructional support would be things like teacher professional development, curriculum development, things such as that. So you can see if you look at the district calculations for our classroom spending and the statewide calculations, we're very much aligned. We're within a couple of percentage points of what it looks like across the entire state. So, and that's also something that's important to consider is when we look at the statewide averages, it is just that. It's all 230 schools, 236 school districts across the state, which accounts for, roughly about 1 million students across the state. So if we isolate that down to our district, our classroom spending is just over 65%, where the state is just about 69%. Our administration is a little bit higher, which is not uncommon for districts the size of Show Low, just because if you were to look at these numbers compared to some of our larger school districts like a Chandler Unified or a Mesa Public Schools that may have more economies of scale with some of their administration, as a statewide average of being there about 10%, the district's a little bit over that statewide average at about 12.5%. Plant operations is a little bit higher. Some of that can be attributed to age of the district buildings. We also have had a lot of repairs and improvements made to our district facilities over the last couple of years, which attribute to some of those costs as well. Our food service is a little bit lower than the state average, but I'm going to show you in a few moments on the next slide a little bit of what the cost per pupil looks like in some of these areas as well. And then transportation is just about right on target with what the statewide average is. So the next piece that I want to show you are some of the metrics that the state included as far as operational efficiency measures. And the areas that they focus in on are not so much the direct instructional side, the student support side, but some of those other areas such as administration, plant operations, food service, and transportation. And what they identify is on a per student basis. So we have a cost per student. We also have other driving metrics, such as the number of administrative positions per student, the cost for our plant operations, our facilities on a square footage basis, the cost per meal, as well as then the cost per mile for transporting our students or the cost per student that we transport to and from school. So you can see in that third column, right about the middle of the slide, what the state averages are, what the peer averages are, and then what our district averages are. And you'll see in the administration and plant operations, while we were a little bit higher when it relates to those percentages in comparison to the total spending compared to the state, when comparing to our peers, you can see that we are very comparable to our peers when it comes to the administrative cost per student, the plant operations cost per square footage, as well as cost per student. Where we are a bit higher comes into play in our food service and our transportation area. And food service, I can point out that we would expect this to look a bit different in our current year because we did go contracted services. So as we continue to evaluate what the cost is, part of that methodology or the rationale for looking at going to an outsourced food service company is to try to control some of those costs as well. And food service overall, when we kind of look at what happened over the last couple of years, we saw many school districts go higher than in years past just because the cost to obtain food became a bit more expensive as well. But you can see that we are for our 23 year quite a bit higher than both the state and the peer average when it came to a spending per meal count. But we know that through our contracted services, for what we are actually paying for our contracted provider, that cost per meal has gone down. And then in the transportation area, you can see that there are a number of other factors that go into there. There's a bit of a disclaimer there that's included in the state report, that when you look at the narrative of the report that is quite lengthy, they do point out that our cost per mile is higher, as well as our spending per mile. But that can also be attributed to, in the last year, we did buy some additional buses. So in years that you buy those large capital expenses, you can see that those costs will spike as well. So that can also explain some of those higher than average costs. And then the next slide that I want to share with you some information on is where we stand in comparison to the state when it comes to our teacher average pay. And when we look at our average pay, we also have to consider the number of teachers with more experience that we have compared to the state average. Our years of experience that our teachers have is above the state average. So as we look at that, that's another consideration, but you can see that our total pay for our teachers is a bit below the state average. And that can be attributed to what other school districts are providing for one-time pay, for performance pay, for salary structure. There's a number of different components that go into average teacher pay, not just the contract amount, but that is something that we should consider so that we can continue to stay marketable and recruit the best and the brightest to work with our students, especially as I just heard that performance from our choir group. So we always want to make sure that we are positioning ourselves to be able to have the best teachers in our district. And then the last piece that I want to point out on this presentation is, just as I mentioned, the full report is available on the State Auditor General's website, which I have provided a link here on the presentation for the governing board as well as the community. I've also provided a link specific to the district report itself, so you can see all of the different metrics. This is an interactive website where when you go to that website and you click on the district page, you can drill down to some of the additional information that's provided. And as I mentioned, when I published this presentation, it had not been published to the district website, but it is now also available on our district website under our financial reports. So all of that information is available to the board as well as to the community. So at this time, I'll open up any questions that members of the board might have regarding this information or other updates that I don't have on other agenda items for this evening's meeting.
Thank you, Karen.
I have a question regarding transportation services. Do you think this is going to level out next year? Since we've already purchased the buses, or do you think it's something we need to be concerned about? I just wanted your feedback on that.
So I would anticipate, knowing what our expenses are in FY24, we did have 2 more buses that were actually we just obtained delivery of them a couple weeks ago. So we have some other larger expenses that are going to hit our books this year. So in 2024, but it is definitely something that I'll be working with Mr. West, and as we look at our mileage and things like that, to take a look at how are we best leveraging our resources so that, all of those dollars that we provide in other areas outside of our instructional program take away from the resources that we have for our instructional program. So I would not be surprised with what I see for the district spending, that in 24 we'll continue to see some of those higher numbers, but then some of these additional resources that we have available to us really go away with some of the grant dollars that are expiring that we're going to talk a little bit about in the budget update, that in the future years we should start to see that level out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I have a question too. Can you hear me?
I
Hi.
can, yeah.
I have a nerdy question. When we're looking at all of these where we're looking at our numbers compared to state averages or our peer averages, do they offer whether or not any of those differences are statistically significant or offer confidence intervals, anything like that?
They don't get into that level of detail within the report. No, I know where you're coming from with this, and the state does not get into that level of detail with the report. They really just present it at face value. So they don't get into the statistical analysis of it. It's more of here's what our formula is, and here's what the results were of that formula.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Does anybody else have anything for Karen?
On this side.
Karen, thank you so much for everything you're doing. Keep up the great work.
Thank you. You will be hearing from me here in just a minute or two for a couple more agenda items.
Oh, yeah, we will, huh? Okay. Hang tight. Item 6.3, Superintendent Report.
The 4 items there, just a facilities update. The junior high is getting their new gate. That's a big deal. I don't know if you guys know where that's at or how big a deal that is. That's actually, the staff there has been complaining about that it's hard to, get in and out. It's actually a safety issue because you're kind of trapped in there, which is it's a great thing for keeping people out as far as the fence goes, but you have to be able to get out. And so I'm excited for that to get done. I think it'll make the staff over at the junior high a lot happier, and just it's just going to be a good improvement for the junior high. And then the roofing at Nicholas is going on. So I give you that information. And we did receive another grant with SFD, so kudos again to Director West to help us with changing out the fire alarm at Nicholas. And then also, we've been asked if we could do a report in regards to end of useful life cycle, which is what the SFD will do, and if that turns out to be where, for the junior high, if we meet the qualifications and there's deficiencies, then we could get funding for not necessarily a new school. I mean, it could, if it's that far gone, but that'll be a good report to do and to see what we might be able to do in regards to SFD and the junior high as well. I gave you the minutes to the Certified Compensation Committee, so that kind of the 301 committee. That plan really isn't changing much. They wanted a little bit of language in there that I'm okay with in regards to maternity. If a teacher was gone from maternity and not reaching those 90 days, they wanted a little protection there. Felt like that was kind of discriminatory because males don't necessarily even have to deal with that. So I thought that was probably good language, but otherwise that won't change much. The numbers won't change other than the base pay, which really doesn't necessarily have to be voted on, but the base we're hoping between our discussions tonight with our meeting and then in May, the 301 plan would actually be put on the agenda for your approval, but that we would go from 7,400 to 8,000 in the base of the 301. And then I just wanted to shout out, kind of kudos to the counselors at the high school and all our counselors, of course, across. But tonight they had what they call the Next Steps night, and so I was over there. I actually have some, I don't know what you call it, swag. I don't know what they call these things, but squeezy balls and cutters, and there was all kinds of stuff, many pamphlets. So universities were there, and then broken up into different groups. They had over 70 some different type of careers that were represented there from throughout the community and outside the community a bit too, of course. So they put them into clusters, and it's just, I don't know if you had a chance to go. I know, John, I saw you there last year, and this is even bigger. It's a huge event. So it's a career exploration opportunity for kids. It's also parent-teacher night, so a good time for them to go and meet with their teachers. And so it's just a fantastic event. It's a huge event. I honestly can't imagine the hours and amount of time it takes to put that on. Not very many people I don't know across the state would necessarily do that. So it's an amazing event, and I'm just real proud of them for doing that, and it's a ton of value to the district for our kids looking at different careers that they maybe never would have thought of. So it's fantastic. And then just lastly, a business manager update. We've been advertising that since February 20th, and we've been kind of holding off a little bit, but we contacted those to let them know that we're still looking, and just be patient with us if we haven't lost you already. We had a lot of candidates and a lot of good candidates, and so they're going to be vetting them and screening them, and interviews are scheduled for April 23rd. And then the committee we have together, so it'll be Mrs. Smith, so we can use her expertise and knowledge. And also, I asked if Dr. Joe Farnsworth could be a part of that, because that relationship's very important. And he's willing and able to do that. And then Charlotte Cosgray and Ben Marchant, Sean West, and Nicole Pike. So it's a good group in that process. And so I know that I see a little typo or a missed word in there, but that they'll select an excellent candidate for us. And the intent is to have that candidate for you to approve in May. So, and knowing that, again, that we plan to have the mentoring services of Mrs. Smith around to make sure that they're successful in whatever they need. So that's kind of part of our plan. It's a little spendy, but it's very important, and that's a very, very difficult job. I've been doing this for a long time and in a couple different states. And I always thought the business manager or CEO, whatever they were called, CFO, gosh, that was a tough job. It's tougher in Arizona. So it's important that we support them and all that. So hopefully that'll be for your approval in May.
Okay, item 7.1, 24-25 budget projections.
Okay, can you all hear me again? So let me share my screen one more time. Okay, so let me talk you through a little bit about what I have to share with you for the budget projections. So just a little bit of background as far as what the budget process and the timeline entails before I get into some of the known and unknown variables at this time. So as you all may recall, our fiscal year starts July 1, which means that we would be entering into a new budget cycle for July 1 moving forward. We have a state statute requirement that we have to have an adopted budget no later than July 15th. So typically what school districts will follow is we do a proposed budget, a formal proposed budget under the state formula and the state reports that are provided to us, the state forms that we have to propose our budget on. We do that at our board meeting in June, and then we publish that proposed budget so that then the governing board can be asked to approve that in July. We will hold a public hearing in July where we will formally present that to the governing board and to the public. And then, as I mentioned, then the governing board would be asked to adopt that budget. Once we adopt that budget, then throughout the year, there are a number of junctures where we need to then reevaluate our budget and readjust our budget, primarily because our funding formula is based off of our current year student enrollment. And in June, we don't know how many students we're going to have enroll in our school district. Come, in this case, the start of the school year, July 31st. We have good projections. We do a lot of projections based off of prior history, rollover numbers. We look at, for example, our second grade going to third grade, our third grade going to fourth grade, etc. So we get some good estimate numbers, but ultimately the state is only going to fund us based off of the students that we actually have enrolled in our district. And those numbers fluctuate throughout the year because we are funded on the average daily membership over the first 100 days of our school year. So as we look at that, what that really brings us into being on a 4-day week, our 100th day really hits in early March. So we don't know what our final enrollment numbers are really until late spring. So we are continuing to monitor that and watch for that. So that's just to give you a little bit of an idea. So what we have for you this evening is a presentation to share with you what are some of the budget variables that, again, are known and not known, and then what are some of the things that we're doing to plan for next year's budget in anticipation of some of the state decisions. So what I'd like to propose is I have a brief presentation with this information. I'd like to go through that presentation, and then we can go through the many questions that I would anticipate of the board so that I can help clarify, again, what information do we know and what are we planning for come FY25. So a little bit about what we do know. So our enrollment, so we are kind of at a place with our enrollment where we're a bit stagnant with our enrollment. And primarily that has to do with a number of different factors. It is partially because families who live in our school district, their kids will be growing up and aging out of the school district, and we don't have as many younger families moving into the area. That's something that we see in a lot of communities across the state. So until we know that we are going to have any additional enrollment, what we are projecting for our FY25 budget is essentially what I refer to as flat enrollment, so no growth. That being said, if we do see growth, we will certainly get that budget capacity. So in this situation, this is where I as from a conservative funding perspective and really looking at making sure that we don't overcommit ourselves, I tend to typically underestimate our revenues and overestimate our expenses. Because then if we are underestimating our revenues and we actually get more, then that's just going to overall help our budget position. So as it relates to enrollment, since that's the primary driver to our operating budget, I'm going to project that we are going to be at least flat with our enrollment. And as I indicated, if there is any additional enrollment that comes in, we will certainly gain that budget capacity. As it relates to our per pupil funding, so the way that our state funds our public education is for our M&O fund, which is our primary operating fund, we're funded on a per pupil basis. That per pupil is then multiplied by our enrollment. And currently within our state statutes and through our voter initiatives that date back to the early 2000s, the state is required through our legislative process to provide what's considered an inflationary factor to our per pupil funding. But that inflationary factor is capped at 2%. So in the years in which our inflation is much lower than we're currently experiencing, we may not see that 2%. But since inflation is clearly exceeding 2%, the maximum that the state is expected to give to us is 2%. Now, in the past couple of years, we've actually seen the state give us a little bit more than that 2%. But based off of where our state budget is right now, I just saw the latest report from the JLBC, which is the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, and we're currently projected to be, as a state, about $1.8 billion short for our FY25 budget. So we are not anticipating anything more than that 2% inflationary factor from the state legislature. There are some longer term implications of that inflationary factor that come FY26. That is at risk of not continuing to be funded at that 2% or the cost of inflation of less than 2%. So that's something we have to take into account as we look ahead at our budget planning beyond 2025. Our district additional assistance, our DAA funding. So the DAA funding is our capital per pupil funding that we receive. And for a number of years, dating back 7, 8, 9 years ago, the state was actually reducing our capital funding. We were not being funded at the statutory limit for our state funding because there was no protection in place for those capital dollars. And many years ago, actually back in the 90s, there was a capital lawsuit because the state was not providing the funding necessary to maintain our facilities to provide the capital needs for our students, whether that be Chromebooks, textbooks, library books, school buses, our building needs, new roofs, new buildings. I know that there was just the update about the potential useful life of our junior high. Overall, the state was not funding that on a appropriate basis. So as the Constitution says, that we were not receiving that funding that was appropriate to support our public education. So that lawsuit came about back in the early 90s. That came about our district additional assistance funding that also brought about the school facility division, in which we as a school district, Show Low receives quite a bit of funding through the school facilities division. Fast forward to where we are today in 2024, we are now, as a state, the state is being sued by public education again because the funding has not kept up with the needs of our facilities. So statewide, basically our state of Arizona is being sued, and there's expected to be a trial start this summer for capital funding. I mention all of that only because while we have not always seen an increase to our per pupil funding on the capital side, the state is going to be hard pressed not to provide an increase to the capital funding in light of the lawsuit that's currently ongoing with the state. The Joint Legislative Budget Council, or excuse me, Joint Legislative Budget Committee, the JLBC, does have in their projected budget a 4.6% increase on our DAA funding. So we have incorporated that in some of our budget variables. TEI, that is our Teacher Experience Index. I previously mentioned that our teacher experience is greater than the state average. What TEI provides for is a bit of a bump in our funding. if we have a average greater than the state average. So while our average is still above what the state average, it's not as high as it was last year. So in 2024, our TEI variable was 1.0175, and we are going to see a variable of 1.0163. That being said, it is still above the state average, so we do receive some additional funding for that. Our classroom site fund monies, those formerly were referred to as Prop 301. I know that Kevin just mentioned that the 301 committee was meeting to talk about performance pay. We also dedicate a good portion of our classroom site fund monies to our teacher base pay, and there are other allowable uses of those classroom site fund dollars. Those monies are based off of sales tax revenues. So as we continue to see inflation so high, we all know that in our personal lives, we're paying more for everything at the grocery store, all of our retail sales, which in turn mean that we're paying more sales tax. And that being said, that there's more sales tax monies going into classroom site fund. So the JLBC was required to give us that per pupil variable as of March 31st. So we know that that number is going up from $758 per pupil to $792 per pupil. And that is part of the recommendation that you will see later in today's presentation and this evening's board meeting for our teacher pay increases as well. We also know that our ESSER dollars are coming to a quick close. And I have a slide specific on our ESSER dollars and how those dollars are currently being spent. And those funds will expire on September 30th of this year. And I'll get into more detail on the ESSER funding here in just a moment. We also know that our Title I funding that comes to us through the Elementary and Secondary Education Act at the federal level is currently projected to be reduced by about 20%. That is a preliminary allocation that we've received from the Department of Education, but that will continue to evolve as the state does receive the final numbers from the federal government and see how those monies are all allocated across the state. With this being said, these variables that we're looking at, all of this is contingent. The per pupil funding that we receive for M&O, the per pupil funding that we receive for DAA, TEI funding continuation, all of that is contingent upon our state having an approved budget. And as of this morning, our state legislature has not started the budget process. Our state legislature is actually now on what they're referring to a limited schedule, in that the legislature is only meeting on Wednesdays at this point, and they are starting their budget negotiations between the legislature. So both chamber budget committees, they will be having those negotiations with the governor's office in hopes that we will have a state budget rather soon, but I am not holding my wishes that we will have a state budget in the immediate future. For the last couple of years, our state budget was not passed until the 11th hour. We are required to have our budget approved in July. The state is expected to have a budget by July 1st. And the last couple of years, it was the last week of June when our legislature did finally approve a budget to send to the governor for signature. So just keep in mind that these variables are, I want to say a very conservative approach, a very conservative approach in that we aren't overestimating. And if there is any additional funding that was to come to us from the state, then we would obviously add that to the budget. But just in light of where our state budget is right now, I'm not anticipating any new money that we're going to see other than this inflationary increase and the increase to our capital district additional assistance. So those are just some of the variables. Now let me talk to you a little bit about ESSER dollars and what that means for us as it relates to some of our operations and some of the programs and services that have been offered in our school district for the past several years. So what are ESSER dollars? So ESSER are the funds that we received from the federal government as a response to the COVID pandemic. So there were 3 rounds of funding that Arizona Public Schools and school districts across the nation received, referring to ESSER 1, 2, and 3. And ESSER 1 was the first allocation that came out very quickly after the pandemic started. And you can see there that we had an allocation just shy of about $600,000, specifically $575,807. Those funds expired and we used them in their entirety. Those expired back in September of 2022. The second round of dollars, the ESSER $2, were just over $3.1 million. Those funds expired this past September. And again, we use those funds in their entirety. So none of those monies were left on the table. The district spent all of those dollars and were able to claim all of those dollars from the federal government. The final pot of money, as you can see, there was a progression of increase to those dollars. Our ESSER $3, we're at just shy of $6.2 million, $6,176,096. Those funds will expire this September of 2024, so about 3 months into the next fiscal year. And we are slated to spend all of these dollars as well. And what I've done here is just a couple of quick bullet points of some of the high level expenses. As you can imagine, with $6 million, there is a much more detailed budget that we operate off of through our general ledger, as well as what we have been approved with the Department of Education. So every dollar that we spend, we have to have approved by the Department of Ed to ensure that they are allowable under this funding source. But just some of the key items that have been funded under our ESSER III bucket of funds. You may recall for the last couple of years, there have been recruitment and retention stipends that have been paid out to our staff. So when those dollars go away, we will not have those dollars to continue to pay for our recruitment and retention stipends. We have had some learning loss interventionists, specifically at the high school. I believe a couple of months ago, there was actually a presentation by them to the governing board. So in this year right now, we have 1.5 FTE or full-time equivalency staff that are paid from the ESSER dollars for that purpose. We have a number of summer school and after school types of programs, additional pay to our staff who perform those summer school and after school programs. We have a couple of classroom teachers in this year that we're paying for out of the ESSER dollars. We have SEL, so that is our social emotional learning staff that provide services to our students. We have paraprofessionals that are in some of our schools. We have a counselor that is currently funded out of the ESSER dollars, was previously paid for out of the M&O dollars, but when these dollars came about, we moved that counselor into the ESSER dollars. We've had a number of non-staffing types of expenses, including several different types of audiovisual and technology, from Chromebooks to laptops to safety and security type measures. So the various upgrades that have happened around our campuses, multiple building improvements to ensure that we have a healthy environment for our students, including some carpet replacements, locker room renovations, drinking fountains, things like that. Various different types of classroom furniture and equipment, from simple chairs and desks to different types of equipment that's used in our classroom, copiers, so that specifically when we were sending packets home with kids and being able to provide more resources to our students, we had functioning copiers for our schools and our offices. The marquees that we see out in front of our schools, as well as I mentioned previously, some school buses that were purchased because many of our school buses were at the end of life. Some of the projections that we have for FY25 based off of these variables, we are estimating that our FY25 budget will be less than our current year budget. But where that is coming from, so while we're expecting our budget to go down, it is primarily because we are projecting that our budget balance carry forward will go down a bit. And again, we carried over a bit more of our budget over the last couple of years because we were able to shift so many expenses into the ESSER fund and not really draw from our general operating fund. So we are anticipating a decrease in our FY25 budget from our current year. So I'm projecting about 21.5. And again, as I mentioned before, I tend to underestimate that budget because we're still several months away from closing out our current year. We will continue to incur costs through the end of June, and then we will continue to pay those costs into the first couple of months of the next fiscal year. So that $3 million budget balance carry forward is a bit lower than what it probably will actually come out to be, but it is also a very appropriate, I would say, reserve amount to have within our budget, primarily because there are some unknowns within our state. One of the things I want to point out of why it's important that we do have a budget balance carry forward is the uncertainty of our district aggregate expenditure limitation. And I can certainly follow up at a future board meeting to provide more information on this. But statewide, every single public school district in the state has a risk of part of their budget if the state legislature does not override what we call our aggregate expenditure limitation. And it has been overridden for this year, but it needs to be overridden each year unless there is a change to our constitution, which requires a vote of the entire state population. So I do feel it's important that we maintain a budget balance carry forward and essentially a reserve of at least $3 million to weather the storm should the state legislature not approve the aggregate expenditure limitation. So our projected budget will go down a bit, but again, as I mentioned, that's primarily due to not a reduction in funding or not a reduction in our per pupil, but rather not carrying over as much funding as we've had in years past. I am estimating our capital budget to be at about 2.4 million, which again is a reduction. So it is about a $500,000 reduction from current year, but that is again primarily because we are not projecting to carry over as much funding because we have done some investments in our buildings and in some of our capital needs throughout the district. So what are some of the things that would be looking at as a change in our FY25 budget? So some of the things that will be brought before you to consider, and you'll see some of these items even on today's agenda or this evening's agenda. We are proposing that we have an increase in our classroom teacher pay coming from our classroom site fund dollars. And we're projecting, as Kevin mentioned, that amount go from the $7,400 that we currently pay per teacher to $8,000, so an increase of $600 per full-time teacher. So that would cost approximately about $110,000 when we look at that cost across our teachers and we add the district paid benefits. So that would be like Social Security, retirement, Medicare, those different types of expenses that we pay on all wages. We've also calculated what the cost of a 2% increase would be for our certified and administrative pay. And oftentimes when I'm presenting proposed budget figures for the governing board consideration, I'll often start with calculating what is a 1% increase or what does 1% cost for our wages. That way the governing board can consider, okay, so if 1% is this, then what is 2%? You multiply it by 2. What is 3%, 4%? So in this case, I've given you what the calculations would be at 2%. So if you wanted to know, okay, if we were to back off of that, what would 1% be? We would essentially take that 170,000 or that 30,000 and reduce it by half. If we wanted to know what 3% would be, we would increase it by 50%. If we wanted to know what 4% would be, we would double those amounts. But to increase our existing certified pay by 2%, as well as the placement schedule for our new hires, we would be looking at about $170,000 for our certified staff and about $30,000 for administrative staff. We previously increased our classified wages. You may recall that our classified staff are subject to minimum wage, and minimum wage is adjusted each year in January. So it is not uncommon for school districts to hold off on any classified wage increases until we see what our minimum wage increases will be in January. So those wages are typically, we saw half of that cost hit us this current year that we're in. So we invested about $200,000 in the current year. The cost that has already been built into the budget for this next year is $400,000. And then if we were to do any additional increase, those would be brought to you later in the late fall, early winter, similar to what we did this year, this past December. We have received our health insurance rates for this next year, and we are seeing an increase in our premiums. We're seeing a 5% increase on our health insurance premiums. So this is what the district cost would be for those health insurance premiums that we pay on behalf of our employees. Employees would also see an increase in the premiums that they pay for any additional coverage, such as if they have spousal coverage, child coverage, family coverage. This would be what the district cost would be. And then some additional expenses. There are some things that we don't have any control of. So utilities, we are aware that APS has approved a rate increase, which will impact public education. So we are looking at a 8 to 10% increase. So when we look at what our utility bill is, that's going to be approximately a $50,000 increase for FY25. We also know that while our enrollment is flat in the sense of we're not growing in our general ed population, we do have an increase in our special education student population. And based off of the requirements that we have to deliver our special education program, as well as the services that have been identified in our student IEP needs, we are aware of 2 additional staff that are needed in the special education area. We've also worked into the budget to sustain some of the ESSER positions, specifically those that are going to be directed to work directly with students in that instructional or student support area. So I mentioned earlier those functional areas. We have some dollars outside of our direct M&O budget that can be used for our direct instruction or academic services, as well as student support that's in that 2100 function that we're recommending that we propose to sustain some of those positions that were in the ESSER budget, specifically the high school counselor that had previously been paid for out of the M&O fund, as well as the 1.5 FTE of our academic interventionist at the high school, as well as adding an academic interventionist because we see the impact of that position at the high school, adding that position at the junior high. And then we do have, as I mentioned, our capital budget. There's various different capital expenses. Our capital dollars, they are often on project basis in the sense of we have some reoccurring capital expenses such as software renewals and things like that. But a lot of our capital expenses tend to be more individual to that particular year. So we have various different capital expenses that we are accounting for, which include technology needs, some additional bus replacements, because as I mentioned, much of our bus fleet, while some of it has been replaced already with some of the ESSER dollars, we have some other portions of our fleet that need to look at replacement that we are starting to spend quite a bit on repairing those buses, that we will start to spend more on repairing them than what the bus itself is actually worth. We are looking at the cost to upgrade the auditorium lighting to make sure that all that lighting, because it's used not just for the performances that we just heard about, but even just for testing when we have students in there, things like that. We need to make sure we have ample lighting in there. And we also recognize that our band uniforms are pretty much at their end of their useful life. So we've incorporated some budget capacity for the replacement of our band uniforms. So with that, I know that that is a lot of information to digest and hear, but I would welcome any questions from the board members of what I can clarify in these budget projections and what we are doing to currently plan for our FY25 budget.
Kelly, do you have anything?
I do.
I know you do.
Yeah, I
And I
do.
think your thoughts are pretty much all of ours, so
Yeah,
I'll let you.
thank you. Hi, Karen. I know you had given some information. I appreciate letting us know like what a 3% raise. That is actually something that I would like to consider looking at. I mean, basically, that is what we gave to our classified personnel. In January, the minimum was at 3%, and then it went on up from that. And so I have concerns not having an equitable percentage across the board. And so I wanted us to maybe look at doing that, at having a 3%. I know it would cost, about $100,000 more. Is that correct, Karen?
That is
Did
correct,
I do my
yes.
math right?
Yeah, so yes, because we're looking at about $200,000 for 2%. So essentially, if you add 50% to that, then later in this evening's agenda, when that item is presented to you, you would modify that motion to recommend a 3% if that's the desire of the board.
Okay. I just wanted to put a plug in for 3%. I think it's important for us to attract and retain the best individuals that we can and keep those great individuals that we already have. We've already given a 3+% earlier in the year to a certain classification of employees, and I just think we should be fair and equitable across the board. I know it costs a little bit more money, well, $100,000 more, but I think it's something we should consider. And I would like to propose us doing that.
Anything, Paul?
Well, until we get further into the budget, do we know exactly, this is projected, what our expenses are gonna be? We're losing COVID money. I mean, and belts are getting tighter, and I agree with 100% of what you're saying. Because we need to retain good people.
And attract them as well. Karen's, our last thing she just showed us were below what this, the state average is. And so this would just bump us up a little bit higher to get closer to the state average. I know I would like to be towards the state average. I know it would go into our reserves, by 100 grand, but I think it would be well worth going into our reserves for that. I just think that that's part of what we're supposed to do is, protect that, but also protect our staff and try to keep our staff and get the best staff we can. We've kind of seen a revolving door, and I don't know. I see this as one way of keeping them, and I think that our administrators should get the same amount as well, the 2%, adding 1% to make it 3%. So anyway, I just
Ellie,
believe
can I
that we
jump
should be
in real
fair and
quickly on that
equitable.
as well?
I'm sorry?
Can I chime in a little bit as well on
Yes,
the
please.
1%, 2%, 3%, and what are our projected expenses for next year? As far as what we are currently funding out of ESSER, a lot of what we are currently paying for, you're absolutely correct, we won't have those dollars. So some of the technology improvements, a lot of the facility needs, things like that, the benefit we had were those ESSER dollars to be able to invest in those areas. So to get to Paul's question, like, do we know what our expenses will be? What we have done is we've looked at what our existing expenses are and what I identified here as far as either continuation or new expenses. That is exactly what we've incorporated into our budget so that we can continue to maintain a $3 million budget balance carry forward, because I feel like that is a appropriate reserve. So yes, if we decide, and again, that $3 million, 2 unfilled positions is likely close to $100,000. So that number could definitely fluctuate from one year to the next as well. But to kind of give the confidence of the board, I do feel like we have a good understanding of what our continued expenses will be within the M&O budget and these expenses. And if the board, it is the desire of the board to kind of dip in a little bit further, there is that budget capacity. But just like in any governmental entity, whether you're talking to a city or a town or a school district, each year we have to reevaluate our expenses. So I would also just point out that we don't know what our enrollment is going to be 3, 4, 5 years from now. So we will continue to have to monitor that and monitor what the state is funding us so that we can continue to dedicate as much of our resources to our wages. I'll tell you that our M&O fund is probably, I want to say, just from what I've seen in our expenditures, we're spending about 85% of our M&O fund on people between salaries and benefits. So we are putting the dollars in the right place when it comes to dedicating our operating costs to salaries and benefits for our staff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
I have
I
one
have a
more
question.
This is probably something that Kevin would have to check on. I noticed an increase of APS utilities by $50,000. What exactly do we get out of that solar thing that's out there? Because half of that's broke. How much does that save us a year?
I can send you a spreadsheet on that. I can't speak to it and probably be close enough to being accurate right at the moment, but I do have a spreadsheet on that. It makes a difference.
Does it?
Yeah, but I've been working with them once I found out who the company was. We have some broken ones, so I don't think it's quite as efficient, but
Broken.
I asked them that very question and how that kind of works for us. I can have that spreadsheet for you guys and get it to you so you can look at it.
Just curious, to see if we're doing the right thing or we're just, it was mandated how many years ago, Kelly?
Gosh.
Long time ago.
Yeah.
But if they're not working, obviously we don't have funds to replace them, but
Well, that's my worry, is it's getting towards the end of its life.
Right.
And I've been working with the company that is in an IGA with us to take care of it. We have some obligation as well. In fact, they're asking us to put a net up, which, 10 years later, whenever number, 12 years later, with the softball field, because they go back and that's where some of them are broken, but there's definitely some ones on the other side. There's a hole in the fence. So I've been asking them that very thing. Well, let's work together and let's get a plan together in regards to those. I don't know exactly. There's also ones over with Whipple where the buses come in or on the road too, but I haven't quite figured out if that's the same company or kind of what's going on, because there's a lot of missing paperwork, I think probably from the fire maybe. So I had to do quite a bit of digging. At one time, APS actually contacted us and saying, hey, because there's money that they're still getting from the rebate from the government program when those were in. So it's not too far off when we're kind of at the end of the cycle or the agreement with those people, and we have to figure out then either have, another agreement with somebody to maintain them, and is it working out for us financially, and all that. We'll have to even take a deeper dive into that. But I will send that to you. I just can't remember exactly, but it was significant. I thought it seemed good. Yeah. I don't know how much money we've put into it either, Paul, or how much we need to. If all of a sudden we have to put a net up, then that starts to make a difference too. But
Well, it's a little late for that. They're already broken.
what's that?
It's a little late for that. They're already broken.
Yeah. So they're supposed to come out and get they're supposed to have a plan that said, are we going to get them replaced? On the agreement, we have some liability ourselves to maintain there too, but so do they. So
If you could check on that a little bit.
Yep.
And as far as the comment that Kelly made, I think that's a very appropriate comment. And that's how we keep and retain and attract new.
for sure.
But until we get a better idea of what our budget is gonna be, I don't know, that might be a little scary to me.
Well, Karen just said, this is
That's
it.
the for sure budget?
This is, yeah, she
This is
just,
low
yeah, she said she's very
Or just
conservative
projections.
in what she's presenting to us, but she feels confident in what this is.
Okay.
And so that's why it's on the agenda tonight for us to
And
discuss it. And there was
I have a
another
related
thing,
question.
I know we had discussed possibly looking at a administrator for the K-5 grades. I don't know how that ended up falling. I noticed it's not on the list, so I kind of wondered where we're going with that.
When did we talk about it?
Well, we
So I
brought it
know-
up at the last meeting.
That's true.
Yeah,
Okay,
and you and I have talked about it since
that's true.
then, too.
We've talked about it. That's true.
Yes. So
That's true.
it's just not making the
Don't
cut.
feel bad, I don't remember.
There's a lot of things we have to prioritize. We have a limited budget, so, that's why we work with our committees and working as an administrative team. And trust me, most of the administrative team is mad at me too, because we don't have enough money to do what each one wants to do. But you have to kind of prioritize. So these are what we think we can have and go forward with, and it's not always going to be agreeable to everybody for sure.
And the junior high interventionist, exactly what will that role play?
Same as the high, well, similar to the high
So
school.
maybe you can review the duties.
Yeah, I don't think, did I not put the job description in here probably this time, but I can do that
Well, that's okay, you can just give an overview.
for what they do.
Uh-huh.
Well, they're gonna work with kids that are struggling and see if they can help them to overcome them and be successful. So it's just the same thing with what the report was with Ashley and Brianna when they came in from the high school.
So it's kind of a continuation of the junior.
Yeah, but at the
high
junior
level.
high level, the one thing that junior high is lacking, really any of that kind of intermediate help. We have a Cubs program at Whipple, and we have added one now to Nicholas. Linden doesn't really have that, but it's a little different entity all by itself. Really, where it's missing is in the junior high, and it makes sense if we can catch them even earlier. Well, that can make a difference, and maybe they can kind of work themselves, where they're going to be more successful in high school. So I think it's necessary at the junior high. They're lacking that comparatively to probably the rest of the schools, and I think it's a good spot to have that person.
I assume they're gonna work directly with those high school interventionists also to coordinate, and
I didn't quite catch that.
I assume that junior high interventionist is gonna work and coordinate with the high school ones in order to have a program that,
Similar?
you know,
Well, I would think professionally, and there could be some work. There could be some work. I don't know if I see a lot of collaboration there necessarily as far as, but they might, you know, say, hey, what's working for you and how does this, you know, do those kind of things, but
Maybe provide.
good, I guess. They could.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there's always any PD that we can provide to help them in their job is a good thing.
So do you think there's anything we can do for the lower grade levels? I mean, anything that we might be able to be creative and, you know, pulling from other staff to help support the principal, or?
Well, we had talked a little bit like a stipend. I think that's a possibility. I don't know how to articulate that and make that, you know, how that would work.
What it would look
People
like?
do a lot of extra all the time, right? I
No,
mean,
I
they
get
come
that,
in and,
yeah.
but it would be helpful if we could find a little bit of administrative help by, you know, just another person. But I don't know if a stipend's the answer to that. One of the things when we did talk about was kind of a part-time at each one. I would not be in favor of that. I do not think I think they'd be set up for failure from the get-go. I just think it's too much to try to do that on both ends. But I could be wrong. I mean, it could work. I've never
What do our
seen it.
administrators think?
Well, the ones that need the help, I think would take anything that they could get. And I don't blame them. I don't blame them for that. You know, but it's, you know, I know just from accreditation standard, that's not too normal in Arizona. Our numbers wouldn't warrant that based across the state of Montana as far as administrative costs. And as you know, were pointed out before with the spending report, we're above a little bit, but we're in line with the state. We're not below with our administrative spending. So it's just, you know, where does that funding come from? And especially when you want to put money into your teachers and stuff like that. There just comes a limit. Budgets are cold-hearted that way. So, you know, if we're even looking at expanding that, given the recommendation from your superintendent and the business manager, that's a risk, right? We might be cutting, and you know, the quality of what we currently have could become a problem because we've overspent. And it wasn't too many years ago where our district was in the red, you know. So just, you know, it's tough, and we're trying to predict where we're going to be. So I think the safer would be to go with the recommendation, but I certainly understand what you guys are thinking too. You wouldn't have to, you know, even if you went 2% now and all of a sudden numbers came in better, you could come back and say, we're going to change that to 3 in May or June or July or whatever, right? So it's not set in stone necessarily that you couldn't react to that later. That's something else that you could consider. You know, budgeting's tough. Budgeting's a tough process.
Well, I hope maybe you can meet with our administrators and maybe collaborate in some way, even pulling from current staff and, I don't know, and somehow offering some assistance to them if we can't afford to do it this year. But I hope that it will be in the front burner in future years.
I think Lamista had a question. She keeps popping on.
Lamista, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. And I do have a question for Karen.
Sure, I'm here as
Karen
well.
Sylvia?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. So my question is, if we were to decide to spend the extra 100,000 to do a 3% raise instead of a 2% raise as what is recommended, where would you suggest that 100,000 come from in the budget? Would it be coming from kind of a reserve, or would there be any planned services or planned expenses that you would recommend we drop in favor of the 3%?
At this point where we're at right now, I would say that it would come from our reserves. So it's not I will tell you that portion would not break the reserve budget. And as I told you, I'm a bit underestimating our reserves. So I would say I'm not opposed to that. I would just caution you that come 26, 27, 28, you know, years down the road, we might have some tough decisions to make if our enrollment does not start to kind of go the other direction. So that being said, you know, on a $21 million budget, that $100,000 is manageable, I would say, for this next year. I just would, you know, just be careful that as we kind of look ahead, are we going to need to look at some other changes. And I think there's, some bigger picture things that we need to look at, from class size to, we've talked about overrides in the past, asking the community for further support, other programs that we offer. So it's just really kind of looking at the big picture. But for the immediate needs for next year, if we roll over everything we have, plus we add these items that we've identified, I do feel that, you could move forward with that recommendation and just know that we won't have as much carry forward than in the future years. And should the state legislature not come through with the aggregate expenditure limitation, we're going to be having totally different discussions, because that's a $3.6 million cut to our FY25 budget after we adopt it. Because if they don't approve it in this budget cycle, we would be looking at this time next year, which, if you think about when we're in, March, April, when our legislature is in session, they would be looking at a cut in the current year of how that would impact Show Low is at about $3.6 million. Show Low would not be alone. You're talking every single school district across the state looking at a 15-16% cut 3/4 of the way into the year. So that's the primary reason why I recommend us building a reserve and maintaining that reserve. But $100,000 isn't going to deplete that reserve down to zero.
Karen, if we were to give the 3%, would that bring our average teacher pay to the state level? Or how much closer would it get us to
Give
the
me one
average?
second. Let me look at that real quickly to see if I can answer that for you. Let me pull that back up.
Okay, thank you.
1 second here. One thing to keep in mind is we're looking at 23. So this is going to be the 23 numbers. We're now in 24. So if I just looked at what 3% would have been for last year, understanding that this year our salaries are different, as are the state average salaries a little bit different. So just give me 1 minute so I can pull that up and look at that presentation one more time to tell you what that increase would look like. Give me 1 minute here. I'm just getting back to that slide. So our average at the time, so again, this is what we reported our average was at approximately 58,000. If I add 3% to that, that would bring us just shy of 60,000. And the state average was just shy of 63,000. So if all things stayed the same, we would still be below the state average with 3%.
Okay, but we'd be closer,
We'd
right?
be closer. Yes, we'd be, assuming that not everybody else does 3%, right? That's
Well,
what,
we'd be a little
know.
closer, and if we're not going to add an administrator at the lower levels, then maybe that would incentivize, our teachers a little bit more to stick with us. So I don't know. I just really hope that we can pull that off.
I really hope that we can too, but
I think we can.
looking down the road, it scares me.
Well, I know, but you look at the aggregate level expenditure, they pass it every year. They hold it over our heads. They always tell us, and guess what? At the very last minute, they approve it. You know what I mean? And it's been a scare tactic for years now. And I don't think that we can, live in fear of everything in the future. And like Karen said, we do have it. And it's $100,000. It's not like it's $1 million. We have $3 million in the bank, I don't know, to keep staff and just a little happier, I think it's worth it. But and again, we're kind of leveling the playing field. We're going 3% across the board. When we're cherry picking every year, we're going to pick this pocket or that pocket or this pocket, then we start creating disparity in our wages. We've had that in the past, and
Oh,
we've
yeah,
had to
I understand that.
We've had
I
to
agree with
pay
you.
to bring it up and level the playing field. And I just think that we should continue to do that. And we should start looking at it. If we're not going to do it this year, then in future years, we need to start doing it like either at the same time, do the salary increases, or I don't know. I just believe it should be fair and equitable. Rant over, I'm done.
I agree with what you said, and there again, I remember the years when we had to freeze wages.
But we're not there, Paul.
We have an election coming up. We're not the federal government. We don't get to print money.
Well, I know, but we have a reserve. And our business manager just told us it's not going to break the bank if we were to
Not
do
this
it.
year.
Huh?
Not this year.
No, but, well, you know,
I'd like to give them a 4%. If you want my,
well, I agree with you. I'd like to give 5%, but, you know,
but I
but
have to look
I'm,
at the,
I'm trying to at least, but if we're going to do 5%, we need to do 5% across the board.
I agree with that
you
also.
know, So,
You're arguing with the wrong guy. What
and just agree with me, Paul.
Okay, I agree.
There's one other little small thing, I don't know how much it is, but, you know, we do have our stipend things too, and we've tied that to a percentage, so I will be coming, you don't have to approve those, to go up, but they're kind of based on the base. So it makes sense to me, although I had it like an administrator, hey, why don't we just leave, and that, you know, it's not wrong to just leave it there either, but I'll probably ask you to do that too, but I mean, if it's three, I mean, it just changes everything if you know, do that, but I hear where you're coming from, we're all, if we're gonna put money anywhere, that's probably, you know, where it should be, but, yeah. And that's actually item number 3 too, but,
Right, right. So are we approving this tonight?
no, you don't need to approve it or
This is
anything,
just
it's
for
just to give you,
information.
we're getting ready so you can, if you
Thank
got,
you.
you know, lots of time to think about it. So she's providing a lot of good information to you guys, so you have some time too. But we were gonna approve the salaries.
Right, exactly. That's the next agenda. Well, I just wanted to thank you, Karen, for this presentation. I think it was great, and I appreciate numbers, and I appreciate seeing everything on paper, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for your questions, your conversation, your thoughtfulness in these decisions. It is difficult in you know, looking at how we dedicate our resources and the uncertainty of our state. And that's probably, as Kevin was talking about, you know, school district, you know, in Arizona, and managing the budget and projecting this is very difficult. And I think that, you know, we've got a lot of the variables that we're working with. Ultimately, you know, we will see what happens with the state budget. But as I said, you know, I'm operating on a very conservative approach when we present the proposed budget for you in June. Once we see what our state lands on, I do anticipate we will see that 2% for our per pupil funding. And I would be as happy as everybody else if we see more kids show up in our schools come July 31st, because that just means that we have more capacity. And if that means build up some reserves for the following year so that we can continue to dedicate monies into our employee wages, as well as other forms of compensation such as health insurance and other benefits, that's exactly where we want to be able to push those dollars.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Karen, thank you. Before we move on, I just want to express gratitude. I know you have a little better feel of the pulse of the things that are going on out there. And I appreciate the fact that you're watching over us and protecting us and staying at I don't mind being conservative on that end at all. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on, 7.2, 22-23 audit.
Okay, you want to still hear from me? Okay, let me bring this presentation up. Okay. Give me just a second here. Okay, so what I have to share with you, so just talking audit in general, as we talk about like what does the audit entail, what audits do we have? I was sad that I wasn't able to join you at the March board meeting. I know Kevin shared the good news from the Auditor General's office on our 90-day letter that we were released from that corrective action. That doesn't mean we can ignore it now. That just means that we were able to demonstrate to them that we were moving in the right direction, and we need to continue to move in that direction. So that was the first piece of good news regarding our audit. What I'm sharing with you tonight's item is an action item. And what we are presenting to you for an action item is the acceptance of our FY23 audit that was recently issued by our external audit firm. So as you may recall, the school district is required to participate in an audit every year. I'm going to share with you a little bit about what that audit entails. We actually have 3 different audits that we go through. We go through a financial statement audit, we go through a federal audit referred to as the single audit, and we go through a state compliance audit. So this audit was for FY23. And I point that out because what the Auditor General's office just looked at in regards to our compliance was our current year, FY24. the samples that they selected to evaluate whether or not the corrective action that we indicated that we have put into place since I started working with the district back in August was all for the FY24 year. So the 23 audit does happen after the fact. So this is for the last fiscal year. So that was the year that would have ended June 30th of 2023. And then of course, all of the year-end closeout and all of the work that the entire district staff from our facilities department, our transportation department providing transportation numbers to Jamie Ramsey and all of the enrollment count information to our special ed count information, as well as our financial procurement, payroll, all of those different areas. So I'll kind of walk you through what all is included, but the item before you this evening is to accept these audits. And I point that out because you're not approving the audits because they have been issued. They're required to be issued by an independent audit firm. So what I'm going to do is kind of give you just a high level overview of what was included in those audits. All of the audits were attached to the agenda item this evening. So I'll tell you, if you have any insomnia, feel free to pull up those financial statements and read those this evening because they are a riveting read. So, but you can see, all of the information that was prepared by our external audit company as well. So this audit presentation, as I mentioned, is for the financial records and the district compliance for FY23, which we already know many of these areas have been improved upon for FY24. So let me kind of talk you through a little bit about what is included in the audit timeline. So last fall, we were required to go out and basically accept quotes for our audit. You may recall that the firm that I work for, Heinfeld Meach, was the district's prior auditors. But now that I am serving in this interim business manager role, obviously our firm could no longer serve as the district auditor because we would not have had independence. So we went out and sought bids from other audit firms in the state, and we selected an auditor back in October of 2023. Shortly after that, the audit firm started making all of the requests. And there is, I will not lie, there is a lot of information that is gathered for this audit. So we started pulling all of that information together in the early winter, November and December. The auditors came on site with us right after the Auditor General's office left. A couple weeks later, we were back on site with the third-party audit firm to conduct the on-site field work for the information that we didn't send them in a more virtual environment. Those audit requests continued throughout the month of February, and then just late in March of 2024 is when the audits were issued. We are required to have those audits issued by March 31st, and we did meet that requirement, whereas in years past, the district was late on their audits. So that's the first gold star is that we were able to meet all of those statutory and federal deadlines for our audit. So as I mentioned, the scope of services for the audit is really for a third party to come in and conduct an audit in accordance with what we call GAAP, our United States Generally Accepted Accounting Standards or accounting principles. And there are specific audit standards that the audit firm must follow that are set forth for us from the federal government. We also, as I mentioned, have that federal audit for our federal programs. So ESSER being a major federal program, they had to look at all of the transactions to ensure that those were allowable under the federal program. Other federal funding sources that we receive include, for example, Title I, Title II, IDEA, our CTE Perkins grant, our school nutrition dollars that we receive. All of those are subject to the uniform guidance requirements as well. And then, as I mentioned, we also have the Uniform System of Financial Records. We refer to it as USFR. Some of us in the school finance world refer to it as USuffer because it's all of our state requirements that we have to follow, from procurement to capital assets to journal entries, our general ledger, all of that. But that USFR manual is no short of about 340 pages of compliance requirements that we have to follow. So all of that is part of what this audit scope of work includes. So the reports that were issued, as I mentioned, are 3 different audit reports. We have an annual financial report and report of internal controls and compliance when it comes to our financial records. And essentially what the auditors are looking at there is what we report in our general ledger, is it materially accurate? And if it was not materially accurate, then they would have to give us a modified opinion on our financial records. So we did not have a modified opinion. So in other words, our financial records, they felt through all of the test transactions that they verified that our financial records were accurate. And as a result of that, we then engage our audit firm to prepare our financial statements, which is included in those documents that I provided you. We have our federal audit, which is called the single audit report. So that is where they look at our federal programs to ensure that we are meeting all the federal requirements for those dollars that we receive. And then, of course, our state requirements, which is the USFR compliance questionnaire. So what we see when we look at the results, so some of the report highlights, if you were to look at the voluminous amount of information that's included, some of the highlights is, as I mentioned, the independent auditors report had an unmodified opinion, which means that that's what we want. We want the unmodified opinion, meaning they did not have to modify our financial records. There's also a section included where the management discussion and analysis. So that's where I provided information as to kind of where we stand with our operations, with our financial record keeping. You'll see throughout the report, there are various accounting standard notes that are included within those financial statements. Any of those notes to the financial statements explain some of the background on those financial statements. And then also we have a statistical section. That statistical section is specific because we are currently paying off bonds. So many years ago, the district voters authorized the district to sell bonds. So basically those are promissory notes that we borrowed money to be able to do capital projects across the district, and we are now paying those back. So as part of those bond sales, we are required to provide certain statistics to the bond holders. So that's the statistical section that's included in our financial statements. So that's a little bit of what you will see in the annual financial report that is included with the audit. In the single audit, as I mentioned, so the primary takeaway there is where you will see a schedule of all of our financial transactions related to our federal programs, as well as any findings that were identified for our federal programs and our requirements for that. And then finally, the Uniform System of Financial Records. No joke that we have over 400 compliance questions that need to be answered that span over 36 pages of information. And there's 18 different areas of compliance. And we'll talk a little bit about what those areas include. So what we found, so what I did here as far as presenting the audit findings for you, what I did is I actually pulled forward the prior year audit findings from 2022 to be able to show you which areas we were able to show as corrected, because otherwise those would be represented as continued findings on our financial statements. So you will see that we had a corrected material weakness over our expenditure cutoff reporting. We continue to have an internal control deficiency when it came to our payroll records, and that was more specific to some of the work. Oh, excuse me, I just bounced off of the wrong page. That was more specific to some of the records that we were not able to locate for former employees. So in our 24 records, when the Auditor General's office looked at that, they were able to identify that those records had been corrected for FY24. So again, that 22 finding did continue in 23. We had a corrected deficiency in our USFR overall requirements. So that was a corrected deficiency that was found in our 23 audit. We also had a corrected deficiency of any unallowable expenditures that was previously identified in our 22. And we did have one new finding, and it's specific to our federal programs, and it has to do with a concept called a federal requirement called Davis-Bacon prevailing wage. When we do building improvements through our federal dollars, which typically isn't done with federal dollars because usually our federal dollars are like Title I dollars or IDA dollars that are more programmatic. But with our ESSER dollars, we had available funds to be able to do some of our building improvements. And when we use those federal dollars, we're required to ensure that the vendor is paying the prevailing wages for all of their subcontractors. And for the projects that were done in 2023, the vendors didn't provide that information to us. I don't anticipate that to be a continued deficiency, primarily because these federal dollars, these ESSER dollars are expiring, and we won't have continued building improvement projects paid for out of our federal dollars. So that finding should fall off when we see our 2024 audit take place. In the compliance area, so our USFR compliance questionnaire, as I mentioned, there's a number of different areas that we have. Some of the key areas that we saw some of the deficiencies, and some of these deficiencies would be like 1 out of 40 records tested or 2 out of 30 records tested. It wasn't all of the records that were tested that had deficiencies. But in 2023, there were some findings in the areas of budgeting, the accounting records, cash receipting, supply inventory, our property control, expenditures and procurement, credit card transactions, payroll, some of the reporting that we have regarding our financial reporting, student attendance reporting, and some of our information technology compliance requirements. Again, many of those areas have already been showed as improved upon for 2024, and the work that we've been doing in the business office to establish our procedures, we know that a lot of those areas have already been corrected. So next steps after tonight's acceptance of the 2023 audit, we are turning around and going to be starting our 2024 audit right around the corner here. So our audit firm has requested that we start the 24 audit this summer. So we will start pulling many of those audit requests this summer during July and August. It is anticipated that the auditors will come on site for what we call a prelim audit visit this summer in August. We will continue to feed them the information that they're requesting throughout the fall. They will come back on site for a final audit visit in November so that we can actually get our audit reports issued even earlier this next year. We're looking to have those issued in December of 2024. So we'll be ahead of the game. While they aren't required to be issued until December 31st, we're targeting to actually get them done earlier. So should anything happen that we need to push that back, we have a contingency window built into that. So that's a little bit of an overview of the audit that's being presented to you this evening for your acceptance. I will point out to Courtney, when this action item does come up, it does need to be a roll call vote. So the state law does require that we do ask our governing board to do a roll call vote for the acceptance of the audit. But I will open it up to any questions that you might have.
You know, this is a lot more complicated than I thought it was, obviously. Kelly probably understands it, but I'll tell you right now, I don't understand all of it, so. I think going into a new superintendent and, you know, what knowledge he has of the budget, and maybe has none, I don't know. I think that we don't want to get hasty in releasing you, Karen, so sounds like maybe not till next November, and unless we get somebody in here that can do the job and get training. I think it's very important that we have a highly trained person. We did have that in the past, and it's been years ago. It's a scary deal. There's a lot of scary deals here tonight. But I'm not in a big hurry to relinquish our relationship with Karen and the folks, so.
I second that.
Yeah.
Just thought I'd throw that in.
That's in the budget.
Okay, very good.
She's around to support.
Kelly, did you see that? That's in the budget?
Yes, I love that. Thank you. Keep it in the budget, okay, Karen?
Okay.
I concur with Paul. What you've done for us is amazing, and I appreciate it. And the district and our stakeholders appreciate it as well. So thank you for moving us into the right direction. And I wanted to thank you for providing training for our staff and kind of getting everybody on board to know what duties are and what expectations are and what the laws are so that we can follow them. So I appreciate all that you've done for our district. And with that, I'd like to approve I'd like to accept the fiscal year 23 audit as presented.
Second.
I've got a roll call.
Oh, roll call it, sorry.
Aye.
Are you doing it? You can do it, Courtney. Go ahead.
Paul Wyatt,
Aye.
John Larson,
Aye.
Lamissa Schultz,
Aye.
Still awake.
Stacy Anderson, Kelly Foyer.
Aye.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 7.3, certified administrative compensation salary placement schedule 24-25.
Well, without going on a rant, I would like to recommend and request for approval a 3% increase for current certified staff, 3% increase to all administrative staff excluding the district superintendent, 2% increase to the 3% increase to the 24-25 certified salary placement schedule. Allow any current certified employee upon verification to be placed upon the certified salary placement schedule if determined to be advantageous. A $600 increase to base for classroom site fund /301 pay, and that includes school counselor salary.
I'll second the motion.
I have a motion and a second. Any other conversation on this?
I got nothing.
I personally would like to stay at the 2% and move to the 3% at a later date if and when the final numbers come in from the state and with Karen's after she's taken a look at it and feels more comfortable than we do at the moment. But with
It's
that,
only, never mind.
Got a motion in a second.
with that said, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? No, I'd like to wait. Did we hear, Melissa?
Did we hear from her?
I said aye. Did you hear me?
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I didn't hear you. Okay, motion passes. 4, new work agreement language. Is anybody presenting this to us at all?
Just the language, it's been recommended by legal counsel. Gonna give an
Everybody's
update.
looked at it. Any questions or?
It's more consistent, I think, throughout now for all of the different classifications. So I'll make motion to approve as presented.
A second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I think I heard her that time. 7.5, classified personnel and employment.
I move to approve the following classified personnel and after-school tutoring for the 24-25 school year.
I'll second the motion.
I have a motion and a second. Any other conversation on this? All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. 7.6, classified transfers, resignations, terminations.
I'll move to approve as presented.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. 7.7, certified personnel and employment.
I move to approve the certified personal employment as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
I'm sorry, opposed? Motion passes. 7.8, certified transfers, resignations, terminations.
I'll move to approve as presented, and I was happy to see that Julie Coda is staying on board as a high school counselor. Yeah, she's Jules, so I know she's, going to come back on ESI. But I approve and thank everybody for their service.
I'll second the motion.
I have a motion and a second. Anything else on this? All in favor? Aye. Did she say aye? I didn't hear.
I did. I said aye.
So you're on there
Okay.
now, yeah.
Okay, so, Opposed is none. Motion passes. 7.9, dual enrollment with NPC.
These are just continuations from previous years, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
No changes.
I'll make motion to approve as presented.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Motion passes. 7.10, Aspen Mojave deposit return.
That's kind of nice, getting a little bit of money back, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I will approve to accept that money.
Take it.
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
Ah.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. 7.11, policy 4-302 pertaining to leave.
That makes sense to you. It's just one of those transitional things. There is some additional language, though, that's good for the district in regards to when we lose somebody during the middle of a year or something, then we don't have to pay that money. So that was language we wanted in there. That's additional. The other language, it was just inadvertent. I don't know how it wasn't part of what we've been doing as a district. So it just needs to be formalized in the new current policies that we have.
And it was up to how many days again? Like 2 weeks? If I
Well,
remember correct?
yeah, so, yeah. Now, there is a number in the leave that I know is, probably needs to be discussed sooner or later, but that's not on for tonight's agenda, but, yeah.
Is there a reason why we wanted to fast track this and do it all in one approval rather than two?
This is what we're doing anyway.
We don't have to do
Doesn't have, I guess, yeah, it's just what, it's what we're doing, and it's what we've done in the past, so it just,
Okay.
why wait another month? It's not like anybody needs to, I didn't figure, but we can certainly go and, that's usually a time when you just go ahead and say, it's good. Move on.
I move to waive the 2 readings and approve policy 4-302 as presented immediately.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
I think I'm gonna vote no on it. I just,
I would also prefer to follow the reading and everything as we normally do. Motion passes 3-2. 7.12, driver's ed curriculum adoption.
I thought it looked great. I motion to approve as presented.
I second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on this? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I think she said aye. Opposed? Motion passes. 7.13, summer school program. Any questions on this or discussion?
I thought it looked great. It looked like everybody had it very well articulated and what's going to be offered for our students, and I appreciate knowing that. I just wanted to thank whoever put it together.
Who did put that together? Do we know?
Summer school?
Yeah, the summer school presentation.
Well, I think kind of all of them. Jamie kind of leads it, and Charlotte, I know, helped her, and I think Jamie's kind of the lead with that, I believe.
Well, thank you. Please thank Jamie.
But everybody has to,
It was great.
Yep.
Yeah, I appreciated seeing it, everything that was going to be done. So thank you. I'll move to approve as presented.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. 7.14, gifts and donations. Looks like we have one from Pizza Factory for $50. Panda Express for almost $50. And Allegra for grad tickets at $507.55. Want to express gratitude for those generous gifts.
I move to approve the gifts and donations as presented. Big thank you.
Thank you for me as well, with a second.
I have a motion, 2 seconds, and a lot of gratitude. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed, none. Motion passes. 7.15, out-of-state field trip for the senior trip, looks like.
I move to approve the out-of-state field trip for our seniors as presented.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
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 Motion passes. 7.16, student fundraising and activities.
I move to approve fundraising activities as presented to include prom ticket sales and the drive-up movie fundraiser.
I'll second the motion.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Do we know what the movie is yet?
Yeah, Princess and the Frog.
Huh?
Princess and the Frog.
Okay.
It's a Disney movie. It's cute.
I don't think I've seen that one, so. All in favor of Princess and the Frog? And prom tickets?
Aye.
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 That could be a date night for you.
No, it won't be. But I'll probably go.
You've seen it, John, you just don't remember.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Item 7.17, future agenda items. Does anybody have anything?
I do. I would like to have a report, Mr. St. John, regarding our IT procedures and, and what safeguards we do have in place for our students. I know we did come under fire last month, and so I would kind of like to let the public know, what we do have in place as a district to provide protection for our students. And
You want that just in my report?
however you want to give it to us would be wonderful. And secondly, I wanted to discuss having an end-of-year staff survey. I didn't know if we wanted it to be a board approved, not approved, but us kind of sponsor it, or if it's something that maybe we can just do from the district office and maybe include Dr. Farnsworth in having some questions. And so I was wondering, if you wanted it to be board approved and be a board thing, or if that's something I could maybe work with Mr. St. John and Dr. Farnsworth in creating questions to go out in the next couple of weeks. And being a short survey, not a long, 30 question thing, maybe 10 max
I
questions.
think it's a good idea to include him so that he can maybe have some influence on those questions to get a feel for what he's coming in for.
Good.
But I don't
May I work with him?
necessarily,
Okay, cool. Thank you. Okay.
I think it is important, but I agree with John.
I think it can be.
I think you'll do a great job.
He would like to be involved.
And if you would, just kind of let us know how
Sure.
things are going.
Will do. Okay, thank you.
And in regards to your first request, there's been a lack of information on that situation in general. Is that anything that you could include with that's allowable with that little report? Because I'm mostly clueless as to exactly what happened, how it happened, where it happened, what happened. And I know there's a lot of that we can't talk about, but.
Maybe you could just give us a board report on it.
I guess,
An email regarding my request.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
along with Mr. Margin.
Him to be
Follow on,
included.
guys.
Probably have.
What do you want?
Yeah, I would. I'd like to see him here every meeting, but
Yeah,
that's just me, funny me, so.
yeah.
I'll provide a report on what IT we have in regards to our internet and, what we have. It's basically I don't even know what they call those. It's a wall of some sort. And then there's some other things, firewall, I think is what they would call it. So I'll provide what I can. I'll just ask Hal to get some information and provide it for you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Speaking, Paul, I'm appreciative of the administration that takes the initiative to be here with us every week, and really grateful for that.
Can I say something about that also? I too am grateful. I think if we had more parents here that would voice their opinion and let us know where they stand, The only time we get anybody that lets us know that's when they're mad. Could we have some that come and are happy?
But just keep in mind with boardsmanship and the board, our own policies, there is, which we've created, and which we use, I think we're kind of alluding to earlier, it's extremely important to follow chain of command. That's a healthy institution. Ones that don't, not so healthy, and we struggle. Yeah, then we're gonna struggle. So that's very important to follow chain of command.
Yep.
If there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, passed unanimously. Surprise, surprise. We'll see you next month, May 9th.